Well, I think every immigrant is ultimately an entrepreneur. They have chosen to take on a fair amount of risk and make a big change for their family with an eye to the future. So, in that respect, I'd say my parents were entrepreneurial in the way that they moved the family.
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host, David Sliman.
Welcome back to Unfinished Business, the podcast show where we dive into the stories of leaders who are shaping the world of business. And today we have the privilege of speaking with a global trailblazer. When I say shaping the world of business, that is what Emily Chang is doing. And I want to introduce her here in a minute, but with over 25 years of experience in driving change, innovation, running organizations, and really working with some of the most iconic brands that are out there today, from shaping Apple's presence in China to overseeing marketing transformation with Starbucks, IHG. Emily brings a wealth of knowledge to running businesses, building organizations, cross-cultural leadership. She's a TEDx speaker, as well as an author of the book, The Spare Room. And now as the CEO of VML West, which is a powerhouse marketing agency. We're going to talk to her about the things in her relentless pursuit of excellence. And I got to tell you, she's all business. We've talked, and she's a superstar. And I'm excited to have her on the show. So Emily, welcome to Unfinished Business.
Thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, you bet. So let's jump right in. Okay, I want to tackle this. Listen, you've worked in leadership roles for some of the biggest brands: Apple, P&G, Starbucks, IHG. Now into your firm at VML West. What are some of the key moments that have defined your trajectory in your career as you've gone along here?
They are normally the moments with the greatest friction, because I think that's where we learn. I was just talking to a mentee who I have been mentoring for over a decade, and she was wondering, is it time to move on? And my first question is, are you running towards something irresistible, or are you running away from something? Because my advice is to never run away. I think when you stick through those times of friction, they're the moments where you learn so much more and you come out so much stronger and wiser. So the couple of moments that come to mind are trying to launch the iPhone 4 in a white color in China. Doesn't sound like much. It's a new color for an old phone that many of us don't even remember. But the white color is just such a sign of prestige and beauty in China. We knew that the customer base was going to go nuts. And there is a somewhat unsavory group that likes to buy products and resell them in China. And it became a very, very challenging situation where people, including my own personal health and wellness, safety, was at risk. We had to deal with such unknowns that it was really trying. It built lifelong relationships with good friends, like my partner in PR. She and I are still really close, though we're doing very different things today. It taught me a ton about how to stay cool under pressure, extreme pressure, and how to take moments of learning, even when you're in the midst of trial. You pause to think, okay, what's happening right now? What can I learn? And then shortly after, look back and say, what could I have been doing better? And what will I do better next time? I think if we don't pause and take those micro moments in the midst of frictiony moments, we lose such rich opportunity to learn. Those are the types of moments that come to mind when I hear your question.
So you said staying cool is really, really important. Can you define some strategies or moments that you can give to our listeners where, you talked about a high pressure situation here in a minute, but maybe some of the strategies you employ to run the organizations, the experience you've had, and then the current organization you run right now to be able to handle that?
A couple things come to mind. The first is reminding yourself you're paid to do this. It's a reason they call it work. I think it's so easy to fall into this sort of strawberry mindset of becoming easily bruised and, oh, this is so hard. Hey, it's work. It's why we're being paid to be here. It's just calibrating for me. The second thought is to remember that at the level you're at, a lot of the easy decisions have been made. A lot of the easy to resolve circumstances have been resolved. You're at the level you're at because you're being paid more. So You get all the hard stuff. And that's, again, what you're paid to do. Those two things, I think I remind myself pretty regularly.
That's
And then
great.
the third thing that comes to mind is,
Yeah.
I think it's called the wisdom prayer, or the Alcoholics Anonymous prayer. It's the reminder that I need to have the courage to change the things I can, the serendipity to understand the things that I can't change, and really I need the wisdom to know the difference between those two things.
Wow, that's great. We need to clip that back. That right there, we're going to clip that back and put out there. But listen to that again. If you're listening to this podcast, clip those right there. That was fantastic. Really a great perspective. I want to talk now about your lessons in leadership, right? Because you've led teams. I mean, what's your team right now that you lead? I mean, as far as organizational wise, I mean, you've done all gamuts, right? I mean,
I
as
have.
far
I
as
have
size.
the biggest team, when you consider the on and off property teams, was at IHG
Yeah.
with over sort of 5,200 people. And I learned so much there because you have to identify very different ways of communicating with a very broad group, and many
Yeah.
people where you don't have the opportunity to build personal relationships. That's
Yeah.
really challenging, because for me, that's my greatest joy. So knowing you have an
Okay.
organization where you can't touch everybody all the time and you can't be there when they need you, how can you be there in the way that you can be? And now my team's about 850 across the West. And same thing, I travel constantly up and down the coast, and I do my best, but there are a couple of things that get in the way, even with this much smaller
Yeah.
team. One is we just merged Wunderman Thompson with VML Y&R, and therefore, amidst the middle of change management, lots of things are changing and some things aren't in my control. The second thing is,
Yes.
when you're part of a bigger network, whether it's VML at large, which has over 30,000 people, or whether it is WPP, that the title CEO has a different meaning depending on the role you actually play. I've been in roles that are much more independent. This is more of an interdependent leadership role. And that comes with pros, which is a lot more resources available and meeting constantly new people within our broader company, which is so much fun. But it also comes with more interdependencies. And I think that can also be a challenge.
Yeah, and based on this merger, I'd like to dig into that a little bit. What were some of the things you've done first? Like once the company merges, like, obviously being CEO and having that leadership role, what were some of the things I would love to hear some of the things you did first once that merger happened?
Even before the merger, my first job
Yeah.
as Wunderman Thompson CEO was also one of change management and merger. So picking up West was a new region. We had multiple offices up and down the coast. Frankly, they hadn't all met each other. And in
Right.
some cases, we had this amazing social boutique called Swift in Portland. People didn't even know it existed. So
Okay.
the first thing you do is remember that what you're seeing, actually, though you're new, may be more holistic in view than what the people actually know who've been here for years. I think that's a really important calibration. So introducing each other, sharing everything you're learning, and not assuming everybody knows is really helpful when you're in the midst of
Yeah.
embarking on change management.
Yeah, and being clear too, I think is always when you're getting to know people, kind of the non-negotiables, right? The things of expectation, culture, and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's
Exactly.
great. So did when you were growing up, did you grow up in a family that were of entrepreneurs, or talk to me a little bit about your background and some of the foundational elements that have gotten you where you are today?
Well, I think every immigrant is ultimately an entrepreneur. They have chosen to take on a fair amount of risk and make a big change for their family with an eye to the future. So in that respect, I'd say my parents were entrepreneurial in the way that they moved the family.
Yeah.
I think, my father was raised in a time where stability is so important. So actually, he's the opposite of entrepreneurial. He stayed at a big company, though he is an incredibly smart man who's in chemical engineering, has a PhD, but never went out. And despite all of the patents that he has, they're all under his company name, because for him, that stability was more important.
Yeah.
Perhaps I grew up with that stability and therefore, have a sense of something different that really appeals to me. I love this book, Orbiting the Giant Hairball. It's an old book
Okay.
written by a Hallmark ECD. And frankly, today, I feel like that's a little bit of who I am. If you asked me, what do you do really well? There are different kinds of
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. I have a lot of friends who are in the total startup space. I would love that maybe one day. But right now, where I think I thrive is give me something that's a little bit Wild West, but give me a little bit of home base of resources and let me go grow that thing disproportionately. That's what I love.
That is great. On your career journey, okay, you've obviously surrounded yourself with great people. Um, you probably know other CEOs. What is it that you feel are some key ingredients in the successful CEOs, obviously such as yourself, and the ones that you've been around, and ones maybe that still need to improve? What are the things that for successful CEOs that you've found as a key ingredient in being in leading an organization?
The first thing that comes to mind is humility.
Mm,
Truly, I think the more senior I get and the more I live, the less I feel like I know. I look back so humbly. I look back even 5, 10 years ago and think, I owe a bunch of people an apology for when I wasn't at my best, for when I thought I knew better and I didn't, when I was overly cocky. I think as you get older, wisdom is underpinned by humility. And that's what
yeah,
makes, I think, great leaders great, because you can lead, but are you really if no one's following? I actually think the idea of earning followership is much more powerful. If you're
yeah,
somebody who
yeah.
can earn followership, that's a relationship that will maintain, especially through moments of challenge.
I think, I'm so aligned with you on that. I think you have to earn it, right? And there's a combination of a lot of things that you have to do to earn that. But there are no leaders. If you're going to lead by fear or by just, dictation, then
Mm-hmm.
you're just not going to get the best out of the people that you have in the organization. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that's a great point. Um, so I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about how you've developed some of these brands. And I mean, like you mentioned, Apple, you were in China developing a brand, you know, cross cultures, right? How, talk to me about that. When you're developing a brand, that any of the brands you've been involved with, what are some of the key things or key ideas or key concepts that you employ when really integrating a brand on cross cultures? What are some of the things you have to do?
Well, if my what, as in the kind of leader I am, is orbiting the giant hairball, I think my how resides in finding the and. And I
Okay.
credit this guy I worked for years and years ago. He's a big deal now at a very big company. His name's Rick Hasselbeck. I remember I would come to him with choices as an associate brand
Okay.
manager. I'd be like, okay, Rick, I've got this project. It's A or B. And every time he would look at me and say, why not both? I used to find him so annoying. I'd be like, dude, you're not making any choice at all. What kind of a leader are you? And actually, he taught me one of life's most valuable lessons, which is, well, why not? What has to be true to not have to make a choice? I had just learned this 2 weeks ago. I was talking to one of my clients. We create
Uh,
a partnership and then we find these sort of sub agencies from a multicultural space. And I was interviewing sort of sub agencies to partner with, and I picked one. And afterward, I thought, why not both? So I'm still learning the same
still,
lesson. I think this idea of and is really important, because if you can build these, a lot of my experience, half of my experience is in China. If you can build these international brands localized and relevant to the country, but remember that they're coming to you because there's something that's wrapped around that brand that they're looking for. That's the and that you constantly have to straddle. I think as well, you have to think about how you're helping the local organization in country understand what headquarters needs, and helping headquarters understand what's really different or reapplicable within the country. I
yeah,
think
what can
the
transcend?
constant and creates a type of a role where you're bridging. There's always a function or a mindset or a physical geography that is a bit of an island. And I think that and means extending the island into more of a peninsula.
Great. Yeah, and I think what are some of the most important questions like that you're trying to unpack right away when you're getting with a brand. Now, I'm just throwing stuff at you here because my mind is turning and there's a lot of things that I'd like to dig into because my background is in marketing and advertising, and I've done a lot of more of the S&B, right? Small to medium
Right,
sized business
right.
advertising, some national brands here in the States, but not more on a global side. Is there similarities in that? Do you take principles of asking like the five most important questions for a brand? Do you start there, or is there just a lot? Is that a lot of different approaches when it comes to developing them?
If the question is, how do you develop a brand abroad? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
A brand, not so much on the, because you always want to be at a local level, right? With a large brand, you want to get
Right.
into the consumer space. And so do the small
Yeah.
SMBs. They
Yep.
always want to
For
get
sure.
into the consumer space.
Mm,
So, but marketing for a plumbing location that
right.
services maybe LA County, and versus a business that is developing a brand that can go nationwide.
Hmm.
Um, are there some similarities in the way you
Got it.
approach it, or are there a lot of differences, or maybe there are similarities and differences? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there is more in common than different. So about half of my portfolio is actually in B2B space and the other half is in B2C. And I think sometimes we think about them so disparately. And fundamentally, there is one core truth. And I think an easy pitfall, whether you're in B2B or B2C, which is thinking about what you want to offer the world. Flip the paradigm, which is who are you trying to reach? And what do they need to hear? When do they need to hear it? And then how can you serve it up? It's reverse engineering, whether it is
Yeah.
B2C, and I think about all the amazing traits that I have in my product that I want to tell you about, or whether it's B2B where I'm like, I am the software that you need and here are the 16 reasons why. Both of those are failing to put your end user first. So instead, if you flip the paradigm and you think through, what do you need? And then how can I help you see that I can address that need? I think that is absolutely a framework that transcends
Yeah.
B2B and B2C.
Focusing on the challenges. I love it. I love it. What's the most, probably, what is the brand that was probably the most challenging for you, the one that you've worked with in all the years? Can you pick one, or is there a couple that stick out for you that were probably the most challenging?
One would be VIX, and I'll tell you why. And then for a very different reason, Holiday Inn. So I'll start with Holiday Inn.
What a
These brands,
contrast.
I know,
What a contrast. I love, this is great. I'd love to hear this.
they're both green. Anyway, with Holiday Inn, it is a brand that's almost ubiquitous. It's like working for Kleenex, but where your brand in some ways almost represents the category.
Yes.
I think as
Yeah.
well as people don't know what Holiday Inn is. It didn't stand for anything, and it's almost interchangeable for any other sort of relatively economy hotel. It was it was a challenge and it was such a big opportunity because in fact there are some points of difference for the brand. For instance, kids eat free. People don't know
Yeah.
that. And then when you think about loyalty programs, so a lot of my work is in customer experience and CRM. Um,
Yes.
there is so much opportunity when you think about points. And this again goes back to B2B and B2C. You have the opportunity to go stay at Holiday Inn with all of your business travel, and then you use the points for personal travel. So you start thinking about how this promise of joy of travel can transcend your B2B and then your B2C. It kind of pays for all your personal family experiences, where, by the way, there's always a pool and your kids always eat free. So we started thinking about how that can come to life. And I remember talking to my creative agency and saying, how do we bring that stuff to life in a way that is distinctive amongst a category where they all seem the same? And I
Yeah.
said, for
Yeah.
instance, I didn't know this. I didn't know how to quote unquote gain my points. And once I started realizing it, I was like, well, that is exactly joy of travel. I bring my, and I can go on a staycation anytime with my kid. And I started talking about how she was much younger at that point, and I didn't have a whole lot of time. Sometimes we couldn't go on vacation, but we could do a staycation. And anyone who has young kids knows that's all they want. They want the hotel and they want the
Yeah.
pool. And so as I was talking, our ECD, Darren, said, can we make that? He came back with a storyboard that was really built off of what I said. And it started to change the game. And we started to see the brand equity scores completely change. And what's
Uh,
interesting is we saw the bookings grow for both B2B and B2C, because what you've done is redefine something that is seen as ubiquitous. You found the point of difference, and then you've demonstrated the opportunity that is available for one guest in two separate sort of ways of using and engaging with the hotel.
yeah. And what I'm hearing you saying is they were trying to put everything into one lane, and then you separated it and really identified those lanes and diversified it almost, uh, which was great. Great perspective.
Well,
That's really interesting.
it's a reminder that we're talking to humans at the end of the day. And even if you're an SMB, that's a human. They are personally consuming your product and they're also consuming it for their business. So helping them understand the value to them, again, goes back to your first question, which is how do you put the user at the center of your decision making versus thinking so highly of your own product that all you do is sort of tout your own benefits. The
Yeah.
other one that was challenging that came to mind was
Yeah.
Vicks. So
Yeah.
that
You were
is a
saying that.
global brand. And my last role at Procter & Gamble was leading Vicks for the world. And you're trying to unify under a brand that people don't really know or care about. You've got all these sub brands. In India, it's Action 500. In Brazil, it's all about the Vapor Rub products. In US and Europe, it's Daymed and Medi-Nite or Dayquil NyQuil. So nobody cares about Vicks, including the people who are running Vicks.
Yeah.
How can you ladder it up to something that starts creating a holistic umbrella under which all the products can reside? And how do you educate along the way to help people understand why there's value to that? We ended up with Breathe Life In. I remember this as a brand statement. Because whether it's Vapor Rub that helps you breathe easier when you're not feeling well, or whether it's Action 500, which is a small 50-cent pill that allows you to get through your workday because you can't afford to be sick, this idea that transcended all of those very disparate products and sub-brands of breathing life in helped us elevate the brand. And it became the next billion-dollar brand at Procter & Gamble. That's the last thing I got to work on before I went to Apple. And I think the lesson we can all extract there is, are we thinking big enough? When we look at one product, one line, and maybe we start developing different products, different services, is there a way to tie them all back up to one unifying principle or idea? Because there is value to that.
Yeah. Listen, your focus is the focus is digital marketing, building brands, right? And you talk about this customer experience. So when you're taking on a brand for that matter, how deep are you going where you're getting involved as a customer for them to feel the experience? I mean, do you go that deep with each and every one of them that you take on?
I think we have to. I
Yeah.
think a brand only represents the best and the worst experience that a person has with you. And so whether it's at Procter & Gamble, we have a way where every employee can call into the hotline and just listen on mute. I used to have it playing all day long so you could hear how people are engaging with your brand and your products. Or whether it is at Apple, we used to do one day a week. This was way before COVID or sort of hybrid workplace, return to office conversations. One day a week, we would go sit back of office and just sit behind the Apple store and work there. Because what you start doing is you hear people coming in on their breaks.
Yeah.
And you start understanding the flow and the cadence of day-to-day work in retail. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important. We started to do the same at IHG. One thing we learned on the Crown Plaza brand, this is a very sort of white collar business hotel. How do you differentiate? Again, same question as Holiday Inn on a different level.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate and create better experiences? Well, one of the things we noticed sitting in the lobby all day is, and this is true for many hotels, there's a ding. And this is true for many hotels. People line up right when they're trying to check out in the morning, and you're creating a huge bottleneck, and people don't have the chance to eat breakfast. So we created a different rhythm sort of operationally where people could check out at the all day dining. Super small adjustment, but suddenly they can put their keys on a sort of physical queue on the counter. They can go grab breakfast and then come back and get their bill and leave. A total game changer for a person who's moving on business travel and trying to get out of the hotel and ideally still grab breakfast. So I think being very close to not only the consumer, but their experience, living their experience, going to see the competitor, never thinking you're too good or that cheap $50 hotel is not a competitor. Well, they might consider it. And if it's in your sort of micro location, of course they're within the consumer or the guest consideration set. So go stay there for a night and see what that feels like. Maybe there's something you can learn, or maybe it'll reinforce that you are really in a different tier.
That's great. And I just, I want to ask one more question on the marketing and advertising side. And I want to move on to the personal life and the personal growth and the challenges of being a CEO and having a family and all that stuff. Because I don't want to miss time on jumping into that as well. But the difference between localization, it goes back to a little bit what I said earlier, localization versus globalization. How do you strike that balance between those campaigns, right? Of resonating with regional audiences versus global audiences. I mean, I really want to know your mind on that, because I find it fascinating when I see these global brands or big brands, they're trying to get in a localized market, and I'd love to know the formula on that, or at least the idea of what your concept is.
I think let's go to like a who, what, where, how framework. The what's the same, the brand is the what. And if people are shopping for Apple or Nike in the Middle East or in Europe or in the States, they're looking for the Nike brand and what it represents. That's what brands are. They represent a philosophy and a way of looking at the world and our role within it. But the who's different. So how do I make sure, again, I put the consumer, the end user at the center of all that I'm designing? That's what user experience ultimately is. And we use UI, UX within a digital space, but ultimately everything that we should be doing, everything that we should be designing and curating should be about putting the who in mind. And that's where maybe there are some nuances because you want to be able to reach them where they're at. The how is going to be local because how are you going to reach them? You know, there are different channels, different platforms in different parts of the world. I think you have to adapt yourself to the way that people expect and want to consume what you have to give them. We are decades away from where we used to put stuff out in mass media and then just kind of hope that the right people saw it. Everything is now informed by data. We have so much more intelligence and we can approach the market and the people we hope to serve in a much more nuanced way. So the what's the same, the who and the how are going to be different when you think about how to localize in a more relevant, delightful way for who you're trying to reach.
It's great. Marketing it fascinates me. And actually, I'm reading a book right now called Positioning by Jack Trout. It's a great book. It's not a tremendously long read, but it's really fantastic book on marketing. And that was one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the show is just the balance between the market strategies and driving that customer experience with iconic brands, but more importantly, on the side of localizing things and really emerging things. So it's globalizing things, I should say. Really great stuff. All right, so now let's talk about your personal life, right? Because I want to talk about the balance in being a CEO of an organization. Listen, there's you've got a lot of responsibility, and then you have your family life as well, right?
Yeah.
And I want you to talk about your experience with that and your position on that is being balanced in actually probably the balance isn't the right word, but managing it. How do I say that?
Yeah.
Managing it. Yeah.
I think that's great because the first thing I'd say is there is no balance. Imagine your family is sort of like a big squishy pile of raw dough and work is this very heavy, solid brick. You can't balance two things that are completely different. I think finding ways to put your hands together and integrate makes so much more sense. And something that's been interesting in my life is because all three of us, we're really blessed that we love adventure. We're very open to new ways of living and experiencing the world. We have had 17 kids in our spare room over the last 20 years. So that has constantly required us to adapt and change the way that we live, much less integrate life with work. And right now we have a split family where my husband is leading an organization that supports the disabled community in China. And we are here in the States, my daughter and I. So having a split family is also a different way of living and working where, making sure we have family time means we eat dinner with him on video every Sunday night, his Monday morning breakfast.
Wow.
And then we have individual sort of one-to-ones. It sounds weird to have a one-to-one with your dad, but Lainey has those. And it's important that they have that time, daddy-daughter, ongoing. And it's important that we have our family time sharing a meal together. And then when we have bigger moments like Thanksgiving, he flew in and we had a week of family time. You have to curate your time much more intentionally. So I think in a lot of ways, I appreciate you asking this question because of the life circumstances and the way that we've chosen to live over the last 25 years, we've had to really think very strategically and be very intentional about how we want to integrate work and life.
Wow. And how long have you been doing this, like the integrations approach that you're talking about, and your husband being over in China right now? How long has that been going on?
2 years, 2.5 years, but 2 years intentionally. So Lainey and I came out for a vacation at the end of COVID. There were only 2 flights. Otherwise, he would have been with us. And we just said, okay, it'll be a girl adventure. And we'll leave dad at home with the dog and the pygmy hedgehog in the expat house that my job paid for. And then we got stuck here for a month and she was going into freshman year. So he ended up in the expat house with the dog and the pygmy hedgehog, wondering what happened to his life. And, again, if you're willing to kind of flow with life, you find there's so much more adventure. I think this is true with career planning, which is what we talked about a while back. And then I think this is true with how we choose to live our best life. There's this Balinese saying, 100 years, all new people. So we have these precious 100 years. And of that, what do we have really cognizantly at our best life? 50, years to do what we think is going to be the most meaningful way to invest these precious years. And so when we ended up here, we knew we'd be here stuck at least a month. We had to get her into school. She's going into freshman year. And we were incredibly lucky that Marymount High School took her. And, I think they had heard about the book, which was another blessing that somebody had heard and was sort of willing to make an exception. All amazing. And now she's at Marymount. I was able to be here through my mother's illness, which otherwise I wouldn't have been because I would have been in China. So you look for the balanced moments in life. You can't balance work in life, but what you can do is have a balanced view of things that happen. There's this, I'm quoting a lot of proverbs, but there's this Chinese proverb, which is about a farmer and he has a son. So everyone's like, wow, you're so lucky you have a son. And he's like, yeah, we'll see. The son gets, called to war. They're like, bad luck. And he says, we'll see. And then on and on and on, the good things and the bad things happen. And really we'll see. It's how you interpret one circumstance that's happening in your life across a much broader timeline.
Yes, but it's funny. My wife is a yoga teacher, and I tell her she should write a book because when she opens up classes, she really talks about different things. And she's mentioned that one, the we'll see, the proverb. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's great. So let's talk. Well, I want to touch on a few things that you talked about, okay? Because it really is interesting. You talk about the time of being here. And I heard this, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and it really stuck with me, Emily. It's like, think about all the time before we were here. Okay. You and I, when I say before I mean before you were here, before I was here, anybody out here who's listening. And then think about all that time after we're gone,
right.
How much time's going to be here. It's like we are here for like a minuscule of time, and you really have to make the most of it. And there's no traditional way of doing things or living. You got to do what's right for you, and you've got to take on this life as if, again, you're here for such a small period of time when you really look at the scope of time as a whole. And that always is in the back of my mind. I've got to push with balance. Right. Like you said, try to balance, because my wife's got to put me in check sometime. I like to go at it and get things done. And it's a good thing. But it also is what has made me successful as well. And you as well. So let's switch gears here before we close up. I want to talk about the book. I want to talk about the spare room and what you put together and the premise behind it. Piggybacks a little bit off of what we're talking about here, but give our listeners an idea of your book, and so some people pick it up. I think that'd be great.
Oh, thanks. It's called The Spare Room, and it started off as a collection of stories of the kids that we've had the opportunity to serve in our spare room over the last 2 decades, kids who were marginalized, who came from abusive situations and needed a safe place to live. We widened the aperture to include lots of other stories, and that was probably one of the reasons that I am such an optimistic human being today, because what you start realizing is everybody is extraordinary. People do amazing things. Some just don't talk about it. Some just don't even recognize how extraordinary they are. But then I started unpacking. So what makes them amazing? What is the spare room? And it is the intersection of 2 things. One is your offer, that unique combination of things that you can bring to the table, your experiences, your wisdom, your capabilities, and then your offense, which is the thing that speaks to you more than anything else that you want to go address in the world. So you can figure out what you want to point your offer at in your offense, that intersection of 2 sort of circles. Imagine a Venn diagram. I'm calling your social legacy. So legacy is that thing you want to leave in this world in those few years that we have together. And social defines the space in which you want to have that impact. And I think this is also a very relevant thing for our businesses. especially for SMB, actually going back to what you were talking about, because you're in a small business space. You probably know all your employees. You probably know most of your clients. What a gift that is, and what a unique space you get to work in. What is the social legacy you want to leave with your company? This is not just about purpose-driven marketing, which a lot of people talk about. Maybe it's your offer and your fence that you want to go after, if that's the space you're in. Maybe it's the offer and the opportunity. I've done some workshops with some of my clients about this. If you think about the unique opportunity that you want to go after, your brand, your offer that you are uniquely positioned to offer, and you find that intersection, you can absolutely accelerate your business. And this is, to me, an accelerant to life. And life is part work, part home.
That is great. What a way to close this up. This has been a fantastic interview, and that was like the perfect way to close this interview up. But I want to ask one more thing before we go. And if you're somebody right now who's in whether the corporate world or thinking about getting into business or leading an organization in any way, shape, or form, what advice would you give them in stepping into that, in the first stage of that? Or maybe they're thinking about stepping into it, or they're about to, or they're going to. What advice would you give them?
Get yourself a board of advisors. We talk about boards when it comes to corporations. They help you bring in areas of expertise and history that they've lived through that you haven't, to make you smarter. Why wouldn't you do that for yourself as a leader? Everybody should have your own personal board of advisors, and be intentional about this. Don't just ask famous people, smart people, high profile people. Think through what you lack, the experience that you wish you had in your life, but you're not going to have. And so who has it and can bring it in? Recently, this was an easy answer, because I've been thinking about this for my daughter. She just turned 16. I want her to have a board of advisors, and I'm writing it into my will. Like, if something happens to me, God forbid, who are the people I want surrounding her? Who can make her smarter, who can inform her and share their wisdom and their lived experiences that will help her broaden her view of the world. I think if each of us does that at the beginning of a role, and ideally ongoing, that makes us so much better. And it, again, requires a degree of humility, going back to your other question. If you don't think you know everything, sort of interrogate what you think you don't know, or what you're not as good as. You have to be really sort of, honest and face into that. But only after you do that can you find the right board of advisors for yourself.
That is great. Fantastic. I want to thank you for being here today. This has been a great interview, and we did change up the background a little bit. We had the dogs barking. I don't think we're going to have here. Actually, we should probably leave the dogs barking in there, because this is everyday life. This is a real life stuff. I mean, my dogs bark sometimes too. But ultimately, I really want to thank you for being here. You have been a fantastic guest on the show, and the balance between leading, extraordinary organizations, the balance of the personal life, and we packed a lot in, and the marketing as a whole, right? Because marketing is just so fantastic to me. But we packed a lot in, and I think it was a great interview, and I want to thank you. And I think any listener who is going to listen to this show is going to definitely get something out of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you or just reach out?
LinkedIn's always good. It's Emily Chang 8621 for any business, any questions you have. I'm pretty responsive. Anything more related to the book, or, sort of my life philosophy, you can find me at www.social. I have to think about it. social-legacy.com. And then on socials, you can find me as well, which is the spare room.
All right.
Emily Chang.
Great. We'll throw it up there for everybody to see.
Obviously, Emily, it's not as top of mind for me. Isn't that funny?
I don't know how the heck you remembered all that. I would just check me out on LinkedIn, and here's the website. No, but ultimately, thank you for being here. It was a fantastic interview. And we'll stay in touch. Let's stay in touch.
I'd love to.
Yeah, that would be great. That'd be great. So thanks again, everybody. Wealth, health, and success to all of you. Like this show, share this show. We appreciate your support. The guests are phenomenal on the show. And Emily, again, you've just added so much value to the show and your experiences, and we love that's why it's becoming so big. But ultimately, everybody, we will see you on the next run. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate you watching. See you next time.
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host, David Sliman.